The night my parents tried to steal my dream house, I ended up bleeding on the floor I built with my own hands. The chandelier above the dining table hummed softly, its light sliding over the dark walnut floors I had chosen myself, every plank laid by a contractor I once trusted. I had designed this home from the foundation up open windows for coastal air brick columns that whispered permanence and a studio where blueprints hung like quiet prayers. But that night, my mother's birthday dinner felt less like celebration and more like a courtroom. Lorraine sat at the head of the table, her pearls gleaming in the amber light. My father Harold swirled wine in his glass, already 3 deep. My younger brother Derek leaned back, slouched a grin crawling across his face. The smell of roast chicken and rosemary couldn't cover the tension that clung to the air like humidity before a storm. "Your brother needs a home to start his family," my father began, voice thick. "You'll sign the transfer papers tonight." I looked up from my plate. "This house was never yours to give." Lorraine's fork clinked against her plate. "You owe this family for every meal we fed you. Don't act like you did this alone." Her words hit harder than she knew. I had worked 3 jobs after college, skipped vacations, eaten canned soup while sending money home during Dad's layoff. But in their eyes, my success was borrowed, a favor they could recall when convenient. Derek smirked. "You always thought you were better than us. All you ever built was walls." I put my glass down slowly, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Maybe I had to survive you." Something in him shifted. The grin faltered, then twisted into rage. He stood so fast his chair screeched against the floor. My father didn't move. My mother sighed, as if bored. Derek grabbed the stack of papers beside him, slapped them onto the table. "You're signing this, Clara." "I'm not." The air snapped. He threw his glass at the wall. Shards exploded across the floor like silver rain. I didn't flinch. That's what broke him. He moved faster than I could breathe, the shove the hard edge of the table against my back, the spin of the room. My head cracked against wood. For a second, all I saw was light. Then warmth, not from the chandelier, but the blood running down my temple. The sound around me warped my mother's voice, detached. "You see what happens when you push him," my father muttered. "Sit down, Derek." But no one moved. I reached out, hand trembling, pressing against the blueprint rolls that had fallen from the counter. The paper beneath my fingers was soft, already soaking through. My lines, every beam, every corner I'd drafted blurred into red. Derek stood over me, chest-heaving eyes wild. "You did this!" he spat. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Somewhere in the distance, glass-rolled wine dripped from the table's edge like a slow metronome. My mother turned away, sipping from her glass. "Call someone to clean this up." The floorboards felt cold under my cheek. I could see the reflection of the chandelier splitting into tiny suns across the puddle forming beneath me. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up sketching this place, promising myself it would be the one space they couldn't touch. The irony burned more than the wound. My breathing slowed. The smell of iron and oak mixed into something metallic and sweet. My vision dimmed at the edges. As everything slipped away, a single thought looped through my head, steady like a heartbeat made of defiance. This house is mine. Then the light fractured one last time, and the world went silent. When I was a child, silence was the rule that held our house together. Lorraine called it manners, Harold called it peace, but it was really just control. You learned early not to interrupt, not to contradict, not to ask why Derek could break things, and I couldn't even raise my voice. My mother's favorite phrase was, "Don't make things harder than they already are," and it worked like a leash. She could pull it tight any time I tried to breathe. Derek was always the golden one. He was loud, careless, but charming in the way that made adults laugh and excuse everything. When he crashed his bike into Mrs. Hampton's fence, Dad paid for the repairs and called it a boy's lesson. When I got a B in math, Lorraine said, "You're slipping." It didn't matter how much I achieved, there was always something wrong with how I did it. I learned to disappear into workbooks, into drawing, into any space where I could build things that made sense. By 14, I was sketching houses in the margins of my notebooks, small safe boxes with rooms where no one yelled. When Dad lost his job at the shipping company, I started working after school at the hardware store. I told myself it was just for gas money, but most of my paycheck went to groceries. Lorraine would sigh when I came home late and ask, "You think we're proud of you for playing hero?" Derek was 17, then old enough to help, but too important to be bothered. I remember watching him on the couch, controller in hand, while I balanced the checkbook in the kitchen. I didn't hate him yet. I just kept waiting for him to change. By college, I knew better. I got into the architecture program at Clemson with a small scholarship. Lorraine said she couldn't help with tuition, but asked me to send money home whenever possible. I did. I sent $50 from every paycheck I earned as a barista. I even covered Derek's community college registration when he said he wanted to try business. He dropped out 3 months later. When I came home that Christmas, my savings had disappeared from the joint account I'd opened for emergencies. Harold blamed the bank, Lorraine blamed confusion. Derek never said a word. I cried that night in my childhood bedroom, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, realizing money was never the real theft, it was acknowledgement. Years later, after graduation, I built my first design for someone else. Then my second. Then I started saving for something of my own. I wanted a place untouched by my family's noise. When I found the small lot near Charleston's Riverbend, it was overgrown, almost forgotten, and perfect. I spent every free weekend overseeing construction-breathing sawdust measuring angles in the fading light. I remember the first time I unlocked the front door after it was finished. The smell of cedar hit me like a promise. I cried quietly on the floor of my empty living room because for the first time I'd built something no one else could ruin. I called it Haven. It wasn't a mansion, just 2 stories of deliberate calm. Exposed beams, warm wood, a kitchen that caught sunrise through a single east-facing window. I painted every room myself. The neighbors probably thought I was obsessive, but every nail, every brushstroke was a line between who I was and who they'd tried to make me. When I finally invited my parents to visit, I expected pride, maybe even a fragile apology. Instead, Lorraine walked in, eyes scanning the walls, and said, "It's smaller than I pictured." Harold grunted. Derek nodded toward the kitchen island and asked quartz or fake marble. I laughed too tight. Quartz. He whistled like I was showing off. After dinner, they left early. I remember standing in the doorway watching their car disappear, the taillights glowing like twin eyes fading into the dark. That's when I understood some people would rather burn what you build than admit they never built anything themselves. A year later, when Harold had back surgery, I let them stay at Haven for recovery. I moved into a short-term rental nearby, thinking I was helping. 2 months later, I stopped by unannounced and found Derek in my studio, his boots on the drafting table, cigarette smoke curling against the ceiling. He said he was keeping an eye on things. My mother called it temporary. My father said it's just family. By the time I asked them to leave, Derek had moved his things into the guest room. They acted like I was the one intruding. After that, silence came back like an old sickness. Lorraine stopped answering my calls unless she wanted something. Derek texted when he needed money. Harold sent polite one-line emails. I threw myself into work. The projects got bigger, the clients wealthier, but inside, I felt like I was still standing in that kitchen at 16, explaining why I couldn't afford dinner. When I finally paid off the mortgage, I celebrated alone. Champagne. Quiet music. The kind of joy you don't tell anyone about because they wouldn't understand. A week later, a letter came in the mail with my parents' handwriting. Inside were legal forms authorization to transfer shared family property to Derek Kane. There was no family property. Haven was mine, every inch paid for with sweat and silence. I didn't sign. Instead, I called Lorraine. She said, "It's just paperwork to help your brother qualify for a loan." I said, "It's my home." She replied, "You wouldn't even have it without us." The anger that followed didn't feel sharp. It was heavy, old, layered like dust. I hung up without saying goodbye. For months, there was nothing. Then came the call. "Come home, Clara. We're having dinner." I should have known better. Looking back, I realized that night wasn't about the papers. It was about years of pretending silence meant peace, that distance meant safety. But silence only made them louder in my head. Every insult, every demand, every time Lorraine called me ungrateful, it echoed in the walls I had built. Maybe that's why I invited them back. Some part of me still believed in family. I thought maybe they'd changed. I thought maybe they'd see me. I was wrong. The house that Silence built was solid, beautiful, and utterly fragile once they stepped inside it again. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing blueprints for a client's coastal renovation. My phone lit up with the word mother, and for a moment I thought about letting it ring out. 2 years had passed since the night I walked away from them, but some reflex born from decades of conditioning made me answer. Lorraine's voice carried that polished sweetness she used with strangers. "Come home, Clara. We're having dinner. Your father wants to see you." The phrase, "come home," landed strange. Haven had been my home, yet she said it like I was the one who left their house behind in shame. I hesitated. "Is everything okay?" She sighed, a theatrical little sound. "Of course. It's just dinner. We miss you." I should have said no, but curiosity is a cruel thing. I told her I'd come Saturday. The drive back to the neighborhood where I grew up felt like walking through a museum of old wounds. The streets were too narrow, the lawns too manicured, as if everyone was still performing their version of normal. Their house looked smaller, older, the paint flaking around the shutters. But the porch light was still that same dull yellow, and the smell of Lorraine's perfume still hit before the door opened. She hugged me like a politician. "You look tired." "Still overworking?" I smiled thinly. "Still criticizing?" She didn't answer. Harold called from the living room, voice booming. "Clara." "Come in here. Your brother's got news." Derek was on the couch, legs spread, wearing a sweatshirt that read, "Legacy Builders." I almost laughed at the irony. His fiancée, Amber, sat beside him, all polite smiles and careful posture. There was a new truck in the driveway, a luxury model I couldn't have afforded even when my firm was at its peak. He looked me up and down. "Hey, sis. Heard you've been busy designing for the rich again." Lorraine shot him a look, the kind that wasn't reprimand, but encouragement disguised as restraint. "Your brother's been doing well. He and Amber are looking for a place. You should be proud." I nodded slowly, scanning the room. My old drawings still hung on the wall, though Derek's childhood trophies now crowded the shelf beneath them. "Congratulations," I said. "That's great." Harold poured himself a drink. "We were thinking maybe you could help. Family discount, you know." I forced a polite tone. "I'm sure Derek can find something within his budget." Lorraine's smile froze. "You've changed Clara. Always so transactional now." The air tightened. I asked where they planned to buy, trying to diffuse it. Derek leaned forward. "Actually, we were thinking of staying close. That river property of yours, it's big enough for 2 families, right?" He said it like a joke, but his eyes didn't laugh. I stared at him. "You're talking about Haven." "Yeah," he said, grinning. "You built it, but it's still family, right? You've got space you don't even use." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Lorraine reached for her glass. "You know he's right. You have no husband, no children. What's a house for if not for family?" The words hit like déjà vu. I remembered standing in that same living room years ago, watching her defend him after he wrecked my car. "He's just stressed," she'd said then. Now she used the same tone. "Don't make this difficult." Derek stood stretched and jingled his truck keys. "We could make this easy, you know. I'll handle maintenance, take care of the place. You focus on your fancy clients." I looked around the room that used to define my childhood, the fake fireplace, the heavy curtains, the framed photo of Derek's high school graduation where my face was cropped halfway out of the shot. Every corner reminded me of how small they'd made me feel. I forced a breath. "I'm not giving you my house." Harold looked up sharply. "No one's asking you to give it. Just share it." "Share," I echoed. "Like I shared my paychecks. Like I shared my name on your loan papers." His face darkened. "Watch your tone." Lorraine rose from the couch, setting her glass down carefully. "You see, this is what I mean. You can't even speak respectfully anymore. That career has filled you with arrogance." I turned toward the door. "Dinner was lovely." "I should go." Derek's voice followed me, low, taunting. "You think you're better because you built something, but that house isn't yours alone. You'll see." I didn't look back. The night air outside smelled like rain, sharp and clean. My hands were shaking when I reached the car. As I drove away, the reflection of their house vanished in the rearview mirror, but the echo of my mother's voice lingered. What's a house for if not for family? I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The answer formed slowly, quietly in my mind. It's for peace. And peace, I realized, was the one thing my family would never let me keep. Saturday evening came wrapped in that southern humidity that makes the air taste like salt and memory. I almost turned the car around twice before I reached Haven. The driveway lights glowed like an invitation and a warning. Inside, the dining room looked staged table set with silverware I hadn't seen since the housewarming party I hosted years ago. My mother, Lorraine, stood near the window arranging roses into a crystal vase, her movements too precise, too rehearsed. My father, Harold, poured wine with the confidence of a man who owned everything he touched. Derek and Amber arrived last, laughing too loudly. He wore a pressed shirt, something he never bothered with unless he wanted to impress or intimidate. The moment they stepped through the door, the atmosphere shifted like static before lightning. "You've outdone yourself," Lorraine said, glancing around. "It still amazes me that you built this place." Her tone made it sound like I'd borrowed the house from someone more deserving. I smiled politely. "It amazes me, too." We sat down to eat. The clink of silverware was the only sound for several minutes. Then Harold cleared his throat. "Clara, we wanted to talk to you about something practical." I set my fork down. "Practical things never go well in this family." Derek chuckled. "Come on, sis, don't be dramatic." He slid a manila envelope across the table. "Just some paperwork. I didn't touch it." "What is it?" Amber smiled tightly. "Nothing serious. We just thought it would be easier if everything was organized. For the family." Harold took a sip of wine. "You've done well for yourself, Clara, but you know life changes. Derek's starting his own company. He needs a place to grow roots. This house could serve both of you." I stared at him. "You mean he could live here?" Lorraine interjected, her voice sugar-coated but sharp underneath. "It's too much space for one person. Besides, Derek's always loved the river view." My pulse quickened. I tried to keep my tone steady. "This isn't a shared property. It's mine." Derek leaned forward. "Legally, sure. But morally, you owe the family. You used Dad's old truck to haul supplies, Mom's recipes for your clients' kitchens. Everything you do came from us." I felt my jaw tighten. "You want me to thank you for existing?" He grinned. A signature would be enough. The envelope sat between us like a ticking bomb. "Sign it," he said again, louder this time. Harold's voice joined in low but commanding. "It's not a big deal. You can always buy another place." My stomach churned. "Why does it have to be this one?" Lorraine put down her fork, her expression turning theatrical. "Because this family built you. We deserve a piece of what you've built." I laughed once bitterly. "You didn't build me. You just took credit every time I stood up on my own." Amber tried to soothe the tension, whispering something to Derek, but he brushed her off. He reached for his wine glass, swirling it until red streaks clung to the crystal like veins. "You design houses for rich strangers, but you won't share one with your own blood." "That's cold, Clara. You mean like when you emptied my savings account, or when you trashed my studio while watching the house?" I asked quietly. His grin twitched. Harold slammed his palm on the table. "Enough. We're family. This is just business." I looked around the table, the same faces, the same hierarchy, the same invisible chains. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, but I could barely swallow. Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "You're being ungrateful again. You never learned that pride ruins everything." Her voice dropped to a whisper meant to sting. "This attitude is why you're alone." The room fell silent. Even Derek stopped smirking. The words landed like a slap. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back. "I'm not alone," I said. "I just stopped living with people who mistake control for love." Derek's eyes darkened. He grabbed the envelope and threw it across the table, papers scattered like snow. "Sign it or I'll make you." Harold's hand hovered near his glass, frozen. Amber murmured, "Derek, please," but he ignored her. I met his stare. No. That single syllable seemed to detonate something inside him. He shoved his chair back, knocking it over. The sound echoed like thunder. He moved around the table fast, the smell of alcohol heavy on his breath. I didn't step back. For one heartbeat, everything went still, the clock ticking, the candle flicker trembling. Then the glass shattered. He threw it against the wall, red wine spraying across my white walls like blood. Lorraine gasped but didn't move. Harold muttered, "Calm down." But Derek didn't want calm. His hand came down hard, shoving the table edge into my ribs. I stumbled. The world tilted. The corner of the table met my temple. The pain was blinding, sharp electric. I fell against the floorboard's vision, stuttering between light and shadow. I remember hearing Amber scream. I remember my mother's voice, flat and distant. "You see what happens when you push him." My father's sigh, heavy with inconvenience. "Call someone to clean this up." My breath came shallow, each inhale a scrape. I tried to lift my head, but the room blurred. My fingers brushed the corner of the blueprint cabinet. The paper beneath was smooth familiar. Safe. Then warm liquid spilled across it mine. The chandelier's reflection split in the crimson puddle near my hand, turning every clean line of my design into chaos. I thought of all the nights I'd drawn those lines, believing structure could protect me. I heard Derek's voice, angry, trembling, fading. "You did this." Then everything went quiet, like the air itself had stopped breathing. I didn't know it then, but that silence would be the only part of the night that truly belonged to me. When I woke, the ceiling above me was not my own. The light was sterile, buzzing faintly, and the air smelled of antiseptic and old cotton. My head throbbed like a slow drumbeat. I turned, slightly wincing, as pain bloomed behind my eyes. A nurse in blue scrubs appeared beside the bed, her voice soft but efficient. "You're in Charleston General. You've been unconscious for almost 12 hours. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry. She handed me a cup of water. "You had a concussion. You're lucky the neighbor called 911. I blinked. "Neighbor." She nodded. "Mary from next door. She said she saw someone leaving your house in a hurry and thought something was wrong." My mind stuttered through fragments, wine glass, Derek's face, my mother's voice, the floor. Everything after that was darkness. "Is anyone here?" I asked quietly. The nurse hesitated. "Your family came by earlier. They said it was an accident." The word sank in slowly like ice water. Accident. She checked the monitors. "You need rest." Then she walked out, leaving me alone with the hum of machines and the faint pulse of shame that wasn't mine to carry. I stared at the IV line in my arm, the bruises on my wrists, the faint smear of dried blood near my hairline. I tried to remember if anyone had said sorry. The door creaked open. Lorraine stepped in first, her designer purse clutched like armor. Behind her, Harold lingered near the threshold, his expression tired, annoyed. Derek wasn't there. Lorraine's voice was measured, sweetened like tea poured over poison. "Oh, Clara, thank God you're awake." I didn't respond. She continued, "The doctor says you'll be fine. You slipped, apparently." I laughed once, bitter and small. "Slipped." She pressed her lips together. "We told them you tripped. You hit your head on the table edge. Derek feels terrible." I turned toward her slowly. "Does he?" "He's your brother," she said sharply. "Families argue. You shouldn't turn this into a scandal." Harold added, "You know how gossip spreads. You don't want that." My voice came out hoarse. "You mean you don't?" Lorraine sighed, sitting beside the bed but not touching me. "You're overreacting. You provoked him. He just lost control for a second. He could have killed me." "Don't be dramatic," she said softly. "You know Derek would never hurt you intentionally." I looked at her perfect hair, her practiced calm, and felt something inside me split cleanly in two. "You watched him do it," I whispered. Her eyes flickered. "We didn't see everything. You saw enough." The silence between us stretched. Harold checked his watch. "Let's not rehash this. You'll come home when you're discharged. We'll sort this out quietly." I turned my face toward the window, away from both of them. "I'm not coming back." Lorraine's voice hardened. "Don't make this difficult, Clara. People already think you've been unstable since your father's surgery. It won't look good if you start spreading stories." I almost laughed again. "You're worried about your reputation, not me." She stood, smoothing her jacket. "Rest. We'll talk when you're thinking clearly." They left without another word. The The door clicked shut, leaving the air heavy with the smell of their perfume and cowardice. Hours passed. Night came. The city lights blinked faintly through the blinds. I tried to sit up, dizziness washing over me. On the bedside table sat a plastic envelope containing my belongings, my phone wallet, and the house keys still stained with a tiny fleck of dried blood. I picked up the phone. 22 missed calls, all from unknown numbers. No message from Derek. No apology. When the nurse returned, she checked my vitals, then smiled gently. "You'll be discharged in the morning. Do you have someone to take you home?" I hesitated, then lied. "Yes." She nodded. "Good. You shouldn't be alone." When she left, I stared at the wall until the shapes of shadows began to blur. The next morning, I signed the release papers myself. At the billing counter, I gave my insurance card, expecting questions about family coverage. The clerk looked up and said, "You're all set. Payment was processed under your own name." I frowned. "By who?" She checked the system. "You did. Automatic debit." I realized then Harold and Lorraine hadn't paid a cent. They hadn't even offered. My vision steadied with a kind of quiet fury. When I stepped outside, the sunlight felt too bright, the air too sharp. My ribs ached with every breath, but the clarity was almost exhilarating. I called a cab, told the driver my address, then added softly, "Take the long way." I needed time to think. Through the car window, the city looked different, every street a reminder that I'd built a life they couldn't understand. I thought of Mary, the neighbor who had called for help, a stranger who had shown more care in 5 minutes than my family had in decades. As the car crossed the bridge toward the river, the water below caught the sun and turned it into a sheet of gold. I pressed my hand against the bandage on my temple and whispered to no one. It wasn't an accident. The words felt solid, heavier than pain, heavier than blood. For the first time in my life, I said something out loud that my family could no longer rewrite. I met Julia Reyes 2 weeks after the hospital. She was the only person who didn't look at me like I was fragile glass. We had gone to Clemson together back when she used to joke that architecture and law were the same thing, both about structure, both about what happens when something collapses. She found me at a cafe downtown, sunlight spilling across the polished wood tables, the kind of place that smelled like new beginnings. I sat there with coffee I couldn't taste, staring at the bruise fading near my temple. Julia slid into the seat across from me, setting down a folder. "You should have called me sooner," she said. Her voice was steady, practical. I told her what happened. The dinner, the shove, the silence afterward. She didn't flinch. When I finished, she opened her folder and pulled out a legal pad. "They can't take your home without consent," she said. "But if you stay quiet, they'll frame you as unstable." I almost laughed. They already did. Julia looked up. "Then we rewrite the story." That line hit me harder than I expected. For years, my family had written my story in their language, the ungrateful daughter, the cold career woman, the one who abandoned blood for success. Julia's tone left no space for that version. She asked for every document, mortgage papers, bank statements, texts. She made copies of everything, marking sections in yellow. They've probably already tried to use emotional leverage. That's how it starts. She wasn't wrong. Lorraine had called 3 times since I left the hospital, each voicemail sounding like a sermon. "Clara, we can fix this. You're just confused. Family shouldn't fight." The last one ended with, "You owe us better." I stopped listening after that. Julia studied the voicemails like evidence at a trial. "Good," she said. "Keep every message. Keep receipts, letters, anything with their handwriting. When people like your mother say family, what they mean is property." She wasn't unkind, just direct, and it made me realize how much I had missed honesty spoken without an agenda. We met again a few days later at my office. The bruises on my arm had turned yellow, the color of old wallpaper. Julia brought coffee and a stack of folders labeled "Financial Abuse Cases." "This is more common than you think," she said, "especially when the target is a woman who's built something on her own." I scanned the pages, stories of daughters, widows, sisters. They all sounded like mine. "Do they ever win?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "When they stop being afraid to call it theft." We worked in silence for a while, the hum of my desk lamp the only sound. She finally asked, "Do you still want to keep the house?" I looked toward the window where Haven's reflection shimmered in the river's surface. Yes, I said, but not for them to see it, for me to remember I built something real. Julia nodded. Then we'll make sure it stays yours. That night, I replayed her words in my head. I thought about how strange it was that justice could sound like architecture, solid, measured, deliberate. Julia didn't believe in revenge. She believed in evidence. You don't need to scream, she had said earlier. You just need proof that they lied. I started gathering everything I could, bills with my name on them, receipts from contractors, even old texts where Lorraine thanked me for paying the mortgage during construction. Each document felt like another brick in the wall I was building back up. A week later, Julia came by with a small black device. Mini camera, she said. If they come back, let it record. I hesitated. That's legal. In South Carolina, she said. One-party consent. You're the party. She smiled. They taught me walls could keep love out, but this time yours will keep the truth in. I installed the camera near the hallway plant where no one would notice. For the first time in weeks, I slept without flinching at every sound. Still, part of me hated that I needed proof at all. I wanted to believe Lorraine when she said we just want what's fair, but fair in her language meant obedience. Julia called it what it was, extortion disguised as affection. Sometimes she stayed late reviewing footage or drafting letters. We talked about everything but my family, her divorce, her dog, the absurd cost of rent. Those hours became small pockets of normalcy, the kind I hadn't had in years. Once she said, "You know, you remind me of someone who builds bridges and never crosses them." I looked at her and said quietly, "Maybe I was waiting for someone to walk across from the other side." She smiled, not as a lawyer, but as a friend. The night before everything changed, Julia texted, "Remember, they'll push again. Just don't push back physically. Let the walls do it for you." I stared at the message for a long time. She was right. My family thrived on my reaction. Silence was how they won. But this time, silence would become my weapon too. Recorded, time-stamped, undeniable. Before bed, I walked through each room of Haven, checking every lock, touching every surface like it was an oath. The bruises still ached when I moved, but something else had taken their place, a calm that didn't feel like surrender. I sat on the floor of my studio, rolled out a fresh blueprint, and began to sketch a new project one line at a time. I didn't know it then, but that drawing would later become the design for something much bigger than a house. Julia had said we'd rewrite the story. What she didn't know was that I'd already started. The first sign that they were watching me came a week later on a Tuesday morning heavy with fog. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk about the property. Don't make this worse." No name, but I knew the tone. It was Derek's kind of threat, clumsy and arrogant. I showed the message to Julia, who barely blinked. "Good," she said. "Let them talk. Every word they send is a confession." That afternoon, I checked the footage from the hidden camera she'd given me. The timestamp showed Saturday night. The front door opened with a key. Derek stepped in, carrying a six-pack of beer and a man I didn't recognize. They walked through my living room laughing, the stranger asking, "She really built all this?" Derek kicked at the baseboard. "Yeah, but she's too busy playing boss lady to live here. Once Mom gets the papers signed, this'll be ours," the man asked. "You sure she'll sign?" Derek's voice dropped mean and familiar. "She always caves eventually." I watched the video 3 times before sending it to Julia. She called within minutes. "That's burglary," she said. "You have him entering without consent, planning to seize property. This is exactly what we needed." Her voice had the sharpness of victory tempered by caution. "But don't confront them yet. The more they talk, the better." So I didn't. I waited. For once, patience didn't feel like weakness. 2 days later, Lorraine called. I let it go to voicemail. Her tone was sweet, coated in guilt. "Clara, dear, we're just trying to sort things out. You don't want this to turn ugly. Derek's been under pressure. He's not himself." When I replayed it later, Julia wrote in her notes emotional coercion. The next week, another message arrived. This one was worse. "If you don't sign, we'll file for elder neglect. You've abandoned Mom and Dad, and the court will see that." I remember staring at those words until they blurred. I'd read about this kind of manipulation in the cases Julia showed me, parents weaponizing age and guilt to trap their children. I hadn't realized it could happen to me. Julia's face hardened when I showed her. "This is a legal threat," she said. "We'll add it to the file. They're building their own noose." I started keeping a diary logging every call, every text, every time I saw a car parked too long outside the house. It wasn't fear anymore. It was precision. The architect in me understood structure. Even lies have blueprints, you just have to trace the lines. I set up another camera near the driveway and a voice recorder near the entryway. Every night I checked the footage before bed. Some nights there was nothing. Others I caught glimpses shadows moving across the porch, the sound of keys rattling. Once I heard Lorraine's voice near the door whispering, "She'll come around." The silence in the house grew heavier, but it was no longer the silence of submission. It was evidence in waiting. One afternoon, Julia stopped by with 2 coffees and a cautious smile. "You've done more in 3 weeks than most clients manage in 3 months," she said. "You're methodical." I shrugged. "I build things. I guess this time I'm building proof." She leaned forward. "That's exactly right. You're constructing a case, not a confrontation." She handed me a printed document, an outline of legal options. "If they escalate, we go to court. But first, we give them the chance to hang themselves with their own words." That night, I heard the sound of gravel crunching outside. I didn't move. I sat on the couch, lights off, heart steady. Through the window, I saw headlights stop at the end of the drive. A figure stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered. "Derek." He walked up to the porch, tried the handle, then swore under his breath when it didn't budge. The camera light blinked once, silent and red. He pounded on the door. "You think you're untouchable now," he shouted. "You'll regret this, Clara." His voice cracked with something between rage and fear. When he finally left, I stood there listening to the night reclaim its calm. The recording caught everything: his words, his tone, even the sound of the bottle he threw against the mailbox before driving off. Julia came over the next morning to review it. She watched in silence, her expression unreadable. When the video ended, she exhaled. "He's spiraling. This is good for the case, bad for your safety. You should stay somewhere else for a few days." I shook my head. "No. I'm not leaving my home again." She studied me. "Then promise me you'll call if he comes back." "I will," I said. I didn't tell her that I'd already changed every lock, reinforced the doors, and set motion alerts on my phone. I'd turned my house into a fortress without realizing it. The same walls my brother mocked had become my sentinels. Over the next few days, I stopped flinching at every sound. The anxiety sharpened into focus. I spent hours at my drafting table tracing lines across paper while the camera feeds played on a small monitor beside me. Each wall I'd drawn on those blueprints now had a real purpose: to witness, to hold truth. One evening, as I reviewed footage, I caught Lorraine and Harold standing at the gate, arguing. The wind carried their words faintly through the mic. "She's not going to budge," my father said. "Then we make her?" Lorraine replied. Her tone was colder than Derek's had ever been. "He'll handle it tonight." My stomach dropped. I paused the video and replayed the line until there was no doubt. Julia answered my call on the first ring. I told her everything, every detail. Her voice was calm but urgent. "Keep the cameras rolling," she said. "If they try again, don't open the door. Just make sure it's recorded. That's your safety and your proof." I looked around the house, the walls I'd built, the lights I'd installed, the glass that reflected my own tired face, and realized I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. My house wasn't just shelter anymore. It was testimony. It happened on a Friday night, the kind of night when the air feels too still, like the world is holding its breath. I had just finished marking revisions on a client proposal when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the front porch camera. At first, I thought it was an animal the river raccoons loved to wander close, but then the notification blinked again, faster, urgent. Someone was at the door. I muted the TV, the silence settling like dust. Through the frosted glass, I saw a shape, a man's outline swaying slightly, the smell of alcohol leaking through even before I opened my mouth to speak. Derek. He was wearing the same dark jacket from the last video, his voice thick and slurred. "Clara. Open up." I stayed still. "Go home, Derek. You think you can hide behind lawyers and cameras?" he yelled, pounding the door so hard that the frame shook. The recording light blinked in the corner like a pulse. "You ruined Mom and Dad." They're a mess because of you. His words hit the wood like stones. You brought this on yourself. I didn't answer. My heart was steady this time, not from courage, but from exhaustion. I had already learned what silence could do. Then came the sound of glass breaking. I froze. The side window near the kitchen shattered inward, and Derek's arm reached through, fumbling for the lock. I stepped back, whispering into my phone. "Julia, he's here! He's breaking in!" Her voice came sharp through the speaker. "Don't confront him. Stay on the line. I'm calling 911. Derek stumbled through the window, cursing as shards sliced his forearm. "Look at what you made me do," he slurred. The living room lights flickered when he kicked the table leg. "You think you can turn Mom against me? You think you can take everything?" I backed toward the hallway, my fingers trembling as I switched the camera feed to live stream. Julia's voice on the phone was calm but urgent. "Clara, get to a room with a lock. Police are on the way. Keep him talking if you can." Derek saw the glow of the phone in my hand and sneered. "Oh, you're recording me again, huh? Is that what this is? Another one of your little games." He took a step forward, glass crunching beneath his shoes. The smell of whiskey hit me like a slap. I held the phone tighter. "This isn't a game, Derek. You need to leave." "It's my house, too," he roared, lunging toward me. I darted sideways, his arm grazing my shoulder. My knee hit the corner of the coffee table, but adrenaline kept me moving. "You're not touching me again," I said, my voice shaking but louder than I expected. He laughed low and cruel. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You're crazy, Clara. Always have been. Mom said you were obsessed." He swung his arm, knocking over a lamp, sparks briefly lighting the room. "You built this stupid place to feel powerful." "Well, guess what? It's just wood. Then why do you want it so badly?" I shot back. The question stunned him for half a second, and that's when the sirens began to wail in the distance. His head whipped toward the sound. "You called the cops. I didn't answer." The flashing blue light from the security monitor illuminated his face, red, sweaty, desperate. He looked less like a man and more like something cornered. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice breaking. He shoved a chair aside and stormed toward the back door, leaving a trail of blood across the floor. The door slammed, the echo rattling the windows. I sank to the ground. Phone still in hand, Julia's voice echoing faintly. "Clara, are you safe?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "He's gone," I whispered. My chest hurt, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was anger wearing calm's disguise. The sirens grew louder until red and blue lights painted the walls like fire. 2 officers entered cautiously, guns drawn, scanning the room. One of them spotted the broken window. "You the homeowner?" I nodded again. "He broke in," I said. "It's all recorded." They secured the house, one officer following the trail of blood outside, while the other took my statement. My voice didn't shake once. Julia arrived minutes later, hair still damp from the rain, phone in hand, already talking to the sergeant. She took one look at me and exhaled. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "He said I'd regret it." Her jaw tightened. "No, he will." They collected the footage-bagged fragments of glass for evidence, photographed the bloodstains. As they worked, I watched the reflection of the police lights flicker across my blueprints still pinned to the studio wall. The house looked like it was breathing with the pulse of red and blue alive, awake. When the last officer left, Julia stayed. She cleaned the cut on my hand, quiet, methodical. "You know what this means, right?" she said. "He just handed us everything we need." I nodded. The exhaustion hit me all at once, but beneath it was something stronger, a weight shifting from my chest to my spine. "Then it's over?" I asked. Julia looked toward the window where dawn was just beginning to tint the horizon pink. "Not yet," she said, "but soon." I followed her gaze to the light creeping over the water. The broken window whistled faintly in the wind. I could still smell the whiskey, the blood, the salt air. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. My family had always used silence to bury their sins. This time, the silence would expose them. The hearing was held on a gray Tuesday morning in a mediation room that smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, the kind of place meant to look calm while everyone inside prepared to destroy each other. The table was long, oval, and too clean. I sat at one end with Julia, my hair pulled back, every bruise gone, but none forgotten. Across from me sat my parents and Derek. Lorraine wore pearls, of course. Harold's suit was pressed his tie, the same deep navy he wore to every serious event, as if repetition could make him respectable. Derek's arm was bandaged, a small reminder of his last visit to my house. He kept looking at the window, not meeting my eyes. Amber sat beside him, pale and silent. The mediator, a woman with kind eyes and a stack of legal pads, started softly. "We're here to discuss the dispute over property ownership. Ms. Hayes, you've brought counsel." Julia nodded. "Yes, I represent Ms. Clara Hayes, rightful owner of the property known as Haven." The mediator turned to my parents. "And you represent yourselves." Lorraine smiled tightly. "We're family. We don't need lawyers to solve this." Julia's pen tapped once against the table. "We'll see." The first half hour was routine papers, signatures, recitations of dates. I barely listened. My mind was fixed on the flash drive in Julia's folder. It contained weeks of recordings, timestamps, and transcriptions. It held the night Derek broke in. It held Lorraine's voice saying, "Then we make her." Every piece of evidence that turned my pain into proof lived inside that small metal object. Lorraine began the performance early. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, her voice dripping with practiced grief. "Clara's been under stress. We only wanted to help her manage her property better. Families share, that's all." The mediator scribbled something down. Julia's tone stayed even. "Mrs. Hayes, are you claiming that your daughter authorized you to transfer the deed of her home?" Lorraine hesitated. She was supposed to. "It's always been understood." Julia's brow lifted. "Understood by whom?" "By everyone," Harold interrupted. "We raised her. She owes us some loyalty." Julia leaned back slightly, almost smiling. "Loyalty doesn't equal ownership," Derek muttered. "You lawyers twist everything." Julia ignored him. "Mr. Hayes, do you recall sending or authorizing any threats toward my client?" He frowned. "Threats. We have text messages from this number," Julia said, sliding a printed page forward. "If you don't sign, we'll file for elder neglect." "Does that sound familiar?" Lorraine's hand twitched. "We were upset. She stopped visiting. You have to understand, we thought she'd abandoned us." Julia's voice sharpened. "So, you decided to coerce her by threatening false legal action. That's not misunderstanding. That's manipulation." Derek slammed his hand on the table. "You can't talk to my mother like that." The mediator raised a hand. "Mr. Hayes, please." But Julia's gaze didn't waver. "Actually, I can." She pulled out the flash drive, plugging it into the small monitor the court provided. The screen flickered, and for a moment the room fell into an unnatural quiet. Julia clicked play. The footage showed Derek stumbling through my living room shouting, "Breaking glass." His words filled the room like heat. "You ruined Mom and Dad. You'll regret this." Then Lorraine's voice from the earlier video, "He'll handle it tonight." The images ended with police lights flashing across the walls of my house, red and blue, washing over everything. Silence stretched long after the video ended. The only sound was Derek's ragged breathing. Lorraine's face drained of color. Harold stared at the table as if reading invisible text. The mediator cleared her throat softly. "Ms. Reyes, this footage is authentic." "Yes," Julia replied. "Time-stamped, legally obtained, and verified." Lorraine tried to recover her voice, trembling with indignation. "She set us up. She wanted this fight. I spoke for the first time." My voice was quiet but clear. I wanted peace. "You brought the fight into my home." Harold looked up, his eyes glassy. "You're destroying the family name Clara." I met his gaze. "No, I'm stopping the lie we called family." The words came out calm, almost gentle, but they felt like fire leaving my mouth. The mediator turned toward Julia. "Ms. Reyes, what outcome is your client seeking?" Julia's reply was crisp. Full restraining order against Mr. Derek Hayes and both parents, as well as a legal reaffirmation of sole ownership for Ms. Hayes. Additionally, charges of trespassing and assault are being filed separately with law enforcement. Derek laughed under his breath, a hollow sound. "You think a piece of paper's going to stop us?" Julia didn't even blink. "No, but a court order and criminal record might." The mediator nodded slowly, flipping through her notes. Given the evidence presented, I'll be recommending immediate protective measures pending formal judgment. Lorraine's voice broke high and sharp. You're really going to do this to your own mother? I looked at her, feeling something that wasn't hatred but recognition. You stopped being a mother the moment you watched him hit me and called it an accident. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The door opened quietly as two uniformed officers stepped in, their arrival timed to Julia's earlier call. The room froze. Derek's chair scraped back. What is this? Julia stood. Mr. Hayes, you're under arrest for aggravated assault and unlawful entry. The officers moved swiftly, reading his rights. Lorraine stood shouting, You can't do this! She's our daughter! Harold just sat there staring at his hands. Derek struggled, yelling my name as they cuffed him. Clara. Say something. I did. Goodbye. As they led him out, the room felt strangely lighter, though the air still trembled with leftover noise. Lorraine sank into her chair, eyes wet but empty. You'll regret this, she whispered. I shook my head. I already did. Now I'm done. Julia gathered the papers, methodical, precise. The mediator exhaled softly. I'll file the summary by end of day. When the door closed behind everyone else, I stayed sitting for a while, letting the silence settle. It wasn't the old silence, the kind that suffocated. This one felt earned, deliberate, like the quiet inside a finished structure. Julia returned after a few minutes, holding my copy of the finalized report. It's over, she said. Legally, emotionally, maybe not completely, but enough for now. I nodded. You were right, I said. Walls can hold truth. She smiled faintly. And truth always stands longer than lies. We walked out into the parking lot, the sky heavy with early evening clouds. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, washing over the pavement, erasing the day's footprints. I stood under it, letting the cold drops run down my face. Julia touched my shoulder lightly. You okay? I looked up at the gray sky. I think this is what okay feels like. In the distance, the courthouse flag whipped in the wind. The world kept moving, uncaring, unbroken. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small beneath it. I was part of its scarred, standing scene. As we reached the car, Julia glanced back toward the building. You know, she said, there's going to be press coverage. People will want to know what happened. I smiled, faint but certain. Let them. Maybe someone else will finally realize they don't have to keep pretending either. She nodded. Then it was worth it. The rain fell harder, washing the courthouse steps clean. And as we drove away, I watched the reflection of its lights blur across the windshield, bright, unsteady, but real. For the first time since the night of the dinner, I felt like the story was mine again. The day after the hearing, I drove back to the house alone. The weather was clear, too bright for what I felt. The sunlight bounced off the river like it was mocking me. The keys were cold in my hand as I unlocked the door, each turn of the lock echoing in the silence that followed. Inside, everything smelled faintly of wood polish and distance. The police had already come and gone, sealing the evidence bags, photographing the damage, but somehow the house still carried a trace of him, of all of them. I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to the sound of the wind moving through the cracks where the glass had shattered. The boards creaked under my feet as I walked through the living room, past the overturned chair, the faint scuff marks where the officers had stood. The walls felt smaller now. Not because the house had changed, but because I finally saw it for what it was. Not a home, just a container for years of trying too hard. The morning light fell through the new glass pane the workers had installed. It touched the spot on the floor where blood had once pooled, mine, then his. I knelt down, pressing my hand to the wood, the faint scent of disinfectant clinging to the air. There was no trace left, but I remembered it perfectly. I remembered the metallic tang, the warmth of it spreading, the sound of my own heartbeat slowing. It wasn't pain I felt now. It was relief that I'd survived it, that the house hadn't swallowed me whole. I walked toward the kitchen. The counters gleamed in sterile order, but everything felt wrong. The coffee mugs were gone, replaced with empty space. The wine glasses Lorraine had once insisted on leaving for guests were shattered during the last fight. I reached for the cupboard, opened it, and found a single plate left behind. It was chipped on the rim, the one I'd used every morning before work. I held it for a second, then set it down gently on the counter. The sound it made was soft, final, Upstairs, the air felt heavier. The smell of drywall dust lingered from where the police had patched the walls after collecting the recordings. I stepped into my old studio, the one place that had truly belonged to me. The blueprints still hung where I'd left them, corners curling from humidity. My latest design lay across the drafting table, an unfinished sketch titled Haven. The word caught in my throat. Haven. It was supposed to mean safety, but now it felt like irony. I traced a line down the center of the drawing, the pencil grooves pressed deep into the paper. This was where I had dreamed of living without fear. Instead, it had become the battlefield. In the corner of the room, a small wooden box sat half covered in dust. It was my father's old toolbox, the one he'd given me before I graduated architecture school. I opened it slowly, the hinges creaking. Inside were tools that had once built things that mattered. A tape measure, a small hammer, a level worn smooth from use. He'd taught me to hold them steady, to measure twice before cutting. I smiled faintly, realizing that I had done exactly that, just not with wood. I had measured every word, every threat, every silence, and finally made the right cut. Downstairs again, I moved room to room, collecting what was left of me. A few sketches, a photograph from before the fractures, began a coffee mug with the words "Strong Foundation" printed on the side. The irony made me laugh, a dry sound that echoed through the empty hall. Outside, the afternoon light stretched across the lawn. The grass had grown uneven patches of weeds where Derek's car had once been parked. I picked up a rake from the porch, started clearing debris without really thinking. It wasn't about fixing it. It was about reclaiming the act of doing something with my hands. As I worked, I thought about Lorraine's face in the courtroom, her disbelief, her trembling lip, the way she'd said, "You'll regret this." Maybe she thought she was warning me. Maybe she thought she still had power over me. But standing there in my yard, sweat mixing with the scent of cut grass, I realized regret wasn't what I felt. It was closure, the kind that doesn't come from revenge or apology, but from knowing you finally chose yourself. When the yard was clean, I sat on the porch steps. The sun dipped low, the sky turning soft pink over the river. I could hear the hum of cicadas, the faint laughter of distant neighbors. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that feels fragile but real. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened an email from Julia. The subject line read, "Finalized ownership and restraining order confirmed." I read it twice, then let the screen dim. I stayed there until dusk, watching the light fade from the windows one by one. Inside, the walls were bare now. Every picture of them was gone. I'd taken them down earlier that morning, one frame at a time, and left the nails empty like quiet punctuation marks. I thought I'd feel grief, but all I felt was stillness. Maybe that's what healing looks like, not joy, not victory, just the quiet absence of chaos. Before leaving, I walked back to the drafting table. I rolled up the blueprint, labeled Haven, tied it with a piece of string, and slipped it into a tube. That word still meant something, just not here. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stood on the porch one last time. The house loomed behind me, its reflection shimmering faintly in the water beyond. It wasn't haunted anymore. It was just empty. And for the first time, that was enough. As I walked to the car, the gravel crunched softly under my shoes. I looked back once, not out of sentiment, but acknowledgement. That house had seen everything, my fear, my silence, my fight. It had taken from me, but it had also given me something back, proof of who I was when no one stood beside me. I whispered into the wind, "We're done." Then I got in the car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller until it disappeared behind the curve of the road. The last trace of the river light glinted off the roof, then vanished. Ahead, the road stretched open and empty, the kind of emptiness that doesn't mean loss, but possibility. I turned up the radio, let the music fill the space where fear used to live, and for the first time, I didn't look back. 6 months after leaving Charleston, I stood in front of a half-finished building that smelled of fresh paint sawdust and rain. It wasn't mine, not yet, but it carried my name on the permit sign Haven Foundation project architect Clara Hayes. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house I once bled in had become the seed for something else entirely, a place for women rebuilding their lives after being stripped of everything by their own families. Julia stood beside me, clipboard in hand, her heels sinking slightly into the soft dirt. You realize this is exactly what you said in court, she said. That walls can hold truth. I smiled faintly, watching volunteers lift beams into place. It turns out they can also hold healing. The idea had started as a sentence scribbled on a napkin during one of our late-night coffee runs. We were both exhausted me from trying to find purpose after the trial from juggling cases that felt like déjà vu versions of mine. I'd told her if I could rebuild from what they tried to destroy, maybe others could too. Julia had looked up and said, "Then let's build that." And we did. Haven Foundation became a small nonprofit first, then something larger. We leased a piece of land near Beaufort close enough to the coast that the breeze carried salt, but far enough that it felt sheltered. Each house we designed was modest, 2 bedrooms, a garden open kitchen light, but the symbolism mattered. The first blueprint was titled Haven 1, the second Reclaim. The women who came to us weren't strangers, they were mirrors. There was Nancy, who'd lost her home after her brother forged her name on a loan. There was Teresa, whose husband had drained every account and left her with nothing but credit card debt. And there was Maggie, 61, who had been evicted from the house she'd paid off because her adult son needed a fresh start. Their stories were brutal, familiar, and unbearably quiet echoes of my own. They arrived tired, skeptical, and still apologizing for being angry. By the time they left, they spoke differently. Straighter. Fuller. One morning, Maggie hugged me after signing her new property deed. "You make women feel safe," she said. I wanted to tell her I didn't, that safety wasn't something I gave, it was something we built together, but my throat tightened, so I just nodded. Julia handled the legal backbone of everything: contracts, ownership protections, recovery funds. I handled design. We called it justice in architecture, half joking at first, until we realized that's exactly what it was. Every window placement, every sturdy lock, every accessible garden path, it all said the same thing. You belong here and no one can take this from you. Our first open house drew a small crowd, local news community volunteers, a handful of donors. The women stood proudly on their new porches, sunlight glinting off the paint still drying on the railings. Julia whispered, "You know the press is going to want your story again." I exhaled. Then they'll get a different ending this time. When the reporter asked why I started the foundation, I said, "Because I learned that silence protects the wrong people. And sometimes the best way to fight back is to build something that lasts." The clip aired that night on local TV. Donations doubled by morning. I kept the original Haven blueprint in my office framed but unsigned. I didn't want my name on it anymore. It belonged to the version of me who still thought family meant safety. The new projects had signatures from all the women who helped design them. Every house bore a name chosen by its owner: Grace, Solace, Phoenix Light. I'd walk through each one before completion, touching the door frames, making sure they closed properly, making sure the floors didn't creak too much. I wanted no ghosts in these walls. One afternoon, Julia arrived with coffee and a grin. "Guess who just got approved for state funding?" she said, waving a letter. "The foundation project is officially recognized under the Victims of Family Exploitation Act." I blinked, taking it in. "That's real as it gets." She laughed. "You've gone from hospital patient to federal grant recipient in under a year. Not bad for someone who once swore off people." I smiled. I didn't swear off people, just the wrong ones. Later that day, as volunteers cleaned up, I walked out behind the main building. The river shimmered in the distance, same color as the one near Charleston, but it didn't feel like memory, it felt like direction. I thought about Derek, probably still in county jail, about Lorraine still clinging to the illusion of reputation. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel pity. I just didn't feel them anymore. That, more than anything, was freedom. At dusk, Julia and I stood watching the sky shift from orange to deep indigo, the scent of new lumber mixed with wet soil. "You know," she said softly, "you turned survival into structure." I looked at the glowing windows of the first finished home and replied, "That's what architects do, we rebuild from ruins." We stayed there until the lights inside began to flicker on one by one, each window filling with warmth. From where I stood, it looked like the entire field was exhaling light. I realized then that I didn't need a house to prove I'd won. I had built something far better proof that survival could become shelter. When we finally left, I glanced back once the foundation lights reflecting on the puddles like constellations on Earth. It wasn't perfect. Nothing real ever is. But it was ours, and it was enough. A year after the night I bled on my own floor, I stood behind a lectern in a small community center off Bay Street, facing a room full of strangers who already knew my story. Some had seen the news coverage, some were survivors from nearby shelters, and a few were volunteers from the Foundation Project. The walls were lined with photos of the new homes we had built, smiling faces, open porches, sunlight on fresh paint. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the microphone in my hand. It wasn't fear this time. It was purpose. Last year I bled on the floors of my own home. I thought that night had destroyed me. I was wrong. It rebuilt me. The room fell silent. Faces leaned forward. I continued. When I woke up in that hospital, my mother told me to stay quiet. She said families don't air their problems. She said I'd embarrass us. But here's what I learned: silence doesn't protect you. It only protects the people hurting you. A few women in the front row nodded, eyes wet. I smiled at them softly. So I stopped being quiet, and the moment I did, everything they'd built on my silence fell apart. Behind me, a projector showed a photograph of Haven 1, the first finished home from the Foundation Project. This isn't just about me, I said. This is about every woman who's ever been told she owes someone her peace, her money, her house, her voice. You don't owe anyone your suffering just because you share their blood. My voice cracked a little, but I didn't hide it. The crack made it real. The hardest part wasn't the bruises. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was realizing how long I'd lived pretending we were a family, pretending love could exist without respect, pretending I could fix people who didn't want to be fixed. I stopped pretending. The audience was still breathing with me. I could see Julia near the back, leaning against the wall, her smile small but certain. I looked at her, then back at the crowd. When I lost everything I thought defined me, my home, my family name, I found what was left underneath. Truth. And truth is something no one can steal once you claim it. I gestured to the photos behind me. Every woman you see here built her own truth. Some of them were told they'd never recover. Some were told they'd never win. But they did. Because healing isn't about forgiveness. It's about ownership of your story, your strength, your next step. A quiet murmur of agreement spread through the room. I saw Maggie, the 61-year-old widow, sitting in the second row. She had moved into her new home last month, the one she'd named Solace. Her eyes met mine, and she mouthed, "Thank you." I smiled. "No," I said aloud, "thank you for reminding me that building isn't about walls. It's about courage." I told them how the foundation had grown, how we'd helped 18 families reclaim their homes from financial abuse, how we'd built 7 safe houses across 3 counties. I told them about the small things that no one writes headlines about: the first time a woman slept through the night, without fear, the laughter of kids running barefoot across a new lawn, the feeling of handing someone a key with their own name engraved on it. Those are the blueprints that matter now, I said. Not the ones I lost in blood, but the ones we draw in hope. The applause that followed was soft at first, then steady, then full. I stepped back, overwhelmed but grounded. When the crowd began to disperse, several women came to me, some hugging, some just touching my hand as they passed. One whispered, "I thought I was the only one." I squeezed her hand. "You never were." Julia approached after everyone left, holding 2 cups of lukewarm coffee. "You were incredible," she said. I laughed. "I was terrified." "Good," she replied. "Means you cared." We walked outside into the cool evening air. The city lights shimmered across the water. For a long moment we stood in silence, watching the river flow past. "You ever think about Charleston?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Sometimes. But not the way I used to. The house doesn't haunt me anymore. It taught me." "What did it teach you?" I smiled, looking up at the stars. That blood isn't always family, and that peace is something you build, not something you're given. Julia handed me her coffee. "You should write that down." "Maybe I just did," I said. Later that night, I drove back to the foundation site. The houses stood quiet under the moonlight, their windows glowing faintly like lanterns. I walked between them slowly, listening to the creak of new wood settling, the sound of life breathing in walls that once didn't exist. I stopped in front of Haven 1, the first at the beginning. Inside, a woman was reading to her daughter, the soft sound of laughter spilling through the open window. For a moment, I just listened. It was the sound of everything I'd fought for. I turned away and looked out at the field where the next set of houses would rise. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine. I whispered into it, not as a prayer, but as a promise. It's over, and it's just beginning. As I walked back to my car, I thought about that night a year ago, the blood, the noise, the betrayal, and realized it no longer lived inside me. It was a story, nothing more, one I'd already rewritten. I didn't carry it. I used it. That's the difference between surviving and living. Before leaving, I looked at the reflection of the houses in the water and said softly, "When they said I destroyed the family, they were right. I stopped pretending we had one." The wind moved gently through the grass as if answering. I smiled. The camera of my mind pulled back then like the end of a film. The lights of the houses flickered against the dark, steady and strong. I didn't need a final line or a dramatic ending. The story had already ended the night I chose truth over peace. Everything after that was construction. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've sat in a room full of people who shared your blood and still made you feel like a stranger. Maybe you've smiled through the ache, telling yourself this is what family does, even when it broke you a little more each time. I know what it's like to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to trade pieces of yourself just to make others comfortable. For years, I thought silence meant strength. I thought forgiveness meant survival. But silence is a slow kind of dying, and forgiveness without change isn't healing, it's surrender. The day I stopped pretending was the day I finally started living. I used to believe that love meant obligation, that if I just worked harder, gave more, swallowed every cruel word, they'd see me as worthy. They never did. And one night, when I lay bleeding on my own floor, I realized something I should have known all along: family isn't who you're born to. It's who refuses to hurt you when they have the chance. Sometimes blood doesn't bind us. Sometimes it burns us. And sometimes letting it go is the only way to breathe again. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too cold, too distant, let me tell you something. You're not too much. You were just surrounded by people who gave too little. They taught you to shrink, to doubt, to apologize for existing. But you deserve a life where peace isn't something you beg for. You deserve a home that doesn't ask you to bleed for it. And you don't need anyone's permission to start building that today. People ask me if I miss them, my parents, my brother, the life that used to be. I don't. I miss who I thought they were, and that's different. I've learned that grief doesn't always come from loss. Sometimes it comes from acceptance, from finally seeing things as they are instead of how we wish they'd been. And once you see clearly, you can't unsee it. That's when healing begins. Healing isn't loud. It's not fireworks or a grand revelation. It's quiet mornings when you make coffee without dread. It's hearing your own thoughts and realizing they don't scare you anymore. It's laughing without guilt, resting without earning it, walking away without explaining. It's living without pretending. That's what freedom feels like. When I built Haven, I thought I was designing houses. But I was really building proof that women can take the ruins of what tried to destroy them and turn it into shelter. Proof that no matter how deep the betrayal, something inside us still believes in rebuilding. If you're watching this and you've been hurt by your own family, please hear me. You are not broken. You were never the problem. The fact that you still care, still hope, still wake up and try again, that's your strength, not your weakness. You don't owe anyone your silence anymore. Not your parents, not your siblings, not your abuser, not your past. You owe yourself peace. And peace begins with truth. So tell your story. Even if your voice shakes, even if they call you dramatic, disloyal, crazy, tell it anyway. Because the moment you speak, the moment you let light into those dark corners, their power ends. Truth doesn't destroy families. It exposes the ones already destroyed by lies. I know this story was mine, but if you saw yourself anywhere in it, if you felt that sting of recognition, this ending belongs to you too. Comment: I stopped pretending too. Let it be your first line of truth. Because somewhere out there, another woman is reading the comments right now wondering if she's alone. Show her she isn't. Show her that survival isn't shame, it's courage wearing scars. Thank you for staying with me through this story, for listening, for feeling, for remembering. My name is Clara Hayes, and this was the year I stopped building walls to keep people out and started building foundations strong enough to stand on my own.